What is up, everybody? This is your guy Cly, and welcome back to Budget Buys. And today is gonna be something kind of interesting. What we have here is the classic arcade handheld system from Tech Solutions, currently on sale at fivebelow. And to be perfectly honest, I've wanted to review something like this on the channel for a while now, but I kinda kept talking myself out of it. For reasons we'll get into later. Future Cly here with a very jarring insert shot, but it has to happen because things have changed when it comes to this little handheld. With the main one being that the 400 game model has been discontinued. In fact, it disappeared from fivebelow's stores and website pretty much the moment I finished editing the rest of this video. And as such, it's been sitting on my hard drive for several months without being uploaded. You can probably tell by the fact that I have a new lighting setup and a new backdrop. I honestly think it looks so much better than my previous one. But the reason I dragged this video out of storage is the fact that fivebelow now has a new version in the form of the 200 game model. However, the only difference between the two of these is the game loadout. So pretty much everything that I'm going to be saying throughout the rest of this video is going to be correct for both of these models. And as such, I'm just going to lean on the old footage. Inside the box, you receive the handheld itself, the manual, a 3.7 volt 1020 milliamp hour battery, a micro USB cable, as well as an AV out cable. Also, a quick look at the batteries included in both of these handhelds, and you'll notice that there's some significant differences here. On the original 400 game model, it comes with a 1020 milliamp hour battery, whereas the newer model comes with a 350 milliamp hour battery. So you're actually getting about 1/3 the playtime out of this thing. Fortunately, this is a generic battery, so you can just buy another BL5C profile battery and you'll be good to go. Now, let's talk about the features of this handheld. First of all, just the overall shell design, because I think it's kind of obvious what the manufacturers were going for. Though, of course, it is obviously a heck of a lot smaller. Heck, it's even smaller than the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Color. And in addition to being very small, it's also surprisingly light. In fact, if I bring in my scale, turn it on, and wait for it to zero out, you'll see that even with the battery installed, it is less than 100 grams, almost 99 on the dot. That's pretty friggin' light, because if I bring in the Game Boy Color, even without a battery installed, it's almost 1.5 times the weight. So yeah, it is very lightweight. Next up, we just have a very different button configuration, to an extent at least. We have the standard directional pad that you see on pretty much everything nowadays. You have a BAYX button configuration, select and start, as well as a reset in the middle here. Though I'm gonna go ahead and say things aren't exactly as they seem. More on that later. Over here on the left-hand side of the console, we have the volume wheel. On the top, we have the power switch, a micro USB port for charging, as well as another feature that I'll mention later, and an AV out port. Now, one feature that is sadly missing from this thing is a headphone jack. Both the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color had theirs on the bottom, but this little guy has nothing down here. And don't think you're going to be using the AV port as a headphone jack because, yeah, that's not going to work. And there are two reasons for that. First off is the fact that the AV cable uses a 2.5 millimeter connector, whereas a standard headphone connector is going to be 3.5 millimeters. It's just not going to fit. Next is the fact that when you have the AV cable plugged in, screen doesn't work on this. And to prove that point, let me go ahead and turn it on, plug in the AV cable, and it turns off. Unplug it, turns back on. The console itself is still running, it's just putting the signal that's supposed to be going to the screen and the speaker out through that cable. Speaking of the screen, I forgot to mention that it is a 3-inch full color LCD, and it's not the worst. I've definitely had worse LCDs, but at the same time, some of the colors do get a little funky. In fact, I had one game during testing where it looked like it had black text on a black background, and I had to hold it at certain angles in order to just see anything. It was less than ideal. And speaking of the speaker, it's actually quite loud. Let me just... Yeah, also, at least in the main menu, you can use the select button in order to adjust the volume in addition to the volume wheel. So you've got that going for you. Also, if you couldn't tell during that little brief demo, the music on the menu is kind of awesome. Let me go ahead and play you a directly recorded snippet. And then cut that short because I have no idea if this music was specifically made for this device, highly doubt it, or if it is a ripped chiptune either from a game or an independent music producer, and I'd rather not get copyrighted. Now let's demonstrate the video output that I was just talking about so that you can see the games a bit better. Alright, I have a little 7-inch TV capable of taking an analog video input signal. I've got all of the necessary cables plugged in, as well as the video output cable on my handheld plugged in, and if I hit the power switch, you have our little 401 game selection pop up on the screen. Now for a jump cut where I talk about some of the available games. Included in the games on this device, you have classics like Dig Dug 1 and 2, Excite Bike, Paperboy, Galaga, Galaxian, Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, Q*bert, and Tetris. In addition to those, you also have some homebrew titles like the infamous Pikachu Tetris, and, for some strange reason, Angry Birds. And back to this angle so that I can talk about one of the weird things that's going on with the control scheme on this handheld. And that's the actual button layout. Because with how it's set up, you would expect this to be B, this to be A, which means your attack, your jump. But while this does technically jump, so does B. Because B is actually your A button and Y is your B button. So I can pick that up, throw it, and jump here. What you have on A and X are actually the turbo modes of A and B. Not exactly what one would expect. I did expect the second pair of buttons to be turbo mode. I just thought B and A would be normal, Y and X would be the turbo. I was wrong. That being said, having a turbo mode does make things a bit easier for certain types of games. And future Cly returns to talk about the number of games actually available on both of these handhelds. I have put everything into spreadsheets, and while I might have missed one or two thanks to typos, it seems like the 400 game model has 119 duplicate games, bringing you a grand total of 281 unique games, while the new 200 game model has 62 duplicate games, or 138 unique games. Also, if you think you're getting brand new games on the 201 model, that's not actually the case. 197 of the games on here, including all of the duplicates, are also available on the 400 game model. You only get 3 new games here, so there's not really a reason to buy this one if you already have the previous model. Alright, as some of you have undoubtedly already figured out, what we're dealing with here is one of the infamous NES on a chip consoles that have been around for decades. And just like with the others on the market, this is packed full of probably questionably acquired ROMs, and as such is most likely illegal to sell. And before I go any further, I do want to say that I'm not here to talk about the ethical discussion surrounding emulation, because there's a lot of good that comes from it, from the archival of games that are never going to see an official re-release to save them from bit rot, to translating games that are never going to leave their original region, to even modifying games for things like randomizers, which is its own massive community. So this is definitely not a black and white issue. But what kinda is a black and white issue is the actual making money from selling a compilation of ROMs. But at the same time, I'm not going to really place all of the blame on fivebelow. And the reason for that is the way the box is presented by Tech Solutions. What somebody in the fivebelow buying department saw in the catalog was this. And on the back of the box, what you see is a selection of stills from games that are actually not on here. But instead, these are from games that are similar to, but more than likely legally distinct from official games. Instead, they got what is one of the more common NES on a chip handhelds available online, including on Amazon. Though, I will say on Amazon they're actually about $20 because they come with a carrying case as well as a second player controller that plugs into the micro USB port. Sadly, the micro USB port doesn't act as a data connection, so you can't swap out the ROM files on this device with some less questionable fare like Homebrew. And there you have the classic arcade handheld game system from Tech Solutions that is currently being sold by fivebelow. And I'm not going to say whether or not you should buy this console. It all comes down to you and your views on emulation. But I think I've gone on for long enough, so until next time, this is your guy, Cly, signing off.